Thank you to the many award-winning artists and dedicated ocean advocates participating in this year's Capitol Hill Ocean Week. You have selflessly devoted your time and effort to marine conservation and to sustaining life on Earth. Thank you for sharing with us the world-class images you have captured. I'm certain they will inspire a new generation of activism, exploration, and understanding of our world's natural systems. You have captured the beauty of our vast oceans and waters that make up our great blue planet, while also showing the severe environmental issues we face. I come from Toledo, Ohio, a community situated on the southern coast of Lake Erie, one of the 5 Great Lakes along America's 4th seacoast, a freshwater ecosystem. The Great Lakes are among our world's great coastal ecosystems whose coastlines stretch over 5,000 miles. Lakes and oceans face many of the same threats, such as harmful algal blooms, rising water levels, pollution, coastal erosion, to name just a few. In recent years, the intensity and frequency of these threats have been amplified by climate change. As co-chair of the Great Lakes Task Force, a bipartisan caucus of members fighting to protect our coastal resources, we rely on visuals to inspire our nation to act. The Great Lakes region depends on the lakes as the lifeblood for our future. In 2014, Lake Erie suffered one of the most harmful algal blooms in its history. 500,000 people were unable to access clean water to drink or cook with. This is something that nobody in our country should suffer. We must come together to solve the challenges plaguing our waters. What you will hear and see today will serve as a much-needed catalyst for change. We only have one planet. We must protect it. It is more important now than ever to engage the public and show the true severity of the threats against our nation's waters. Thank you for leading us forward.
Good morning. Welcome to Inspiring Action with Media and Art. I'm Barbara Matilsky, the moderator of this panel. Before we get started, I want to thank the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation for bringing this fantastic group of artists to the Chow Conference. With the growing problems facing marine ecosystems, it's more important than ever that people with different creative perspectives help tackle these critical issues. This panel will specifically address how the arts can help people engage in conserving the ocean and protecting its biodiversity. As you will see from their presentations, the artists are wonderfully diverse. They use a wide array of different media: Brian Scarry, photography; Jonatha Giddens, field journaling and haiku poetry; Ian Shive, film; Angela Haseltine, Pozzi, sculptures made from recycled ocean debris; and Courtney Madison, ceramic sculptural installation. Yet, even though their works reflect different approaches to the creative process, they all believe that art can effectively communicate on a deep emotional level a love of the oceans and its life. By evoking beauty and empathy, more people can be reached and inspired to promote actions for positive change. Also, in keeping with the multidisciplinary aspects of ecology, the artists on this panel have found a very personal way to integrate science and art. It's significant that the two disciplines share many similarities, most importantly, the keen powers of observation and interpretation. In this session, you will discover outside-the-box perspectives and approaches to environmental education and conservation. So let's get started with Brian Scarry.
All right. Well, thanks very much, Barbara. It's always a pleasure to be part of Chow, even if it's a little bit unprecedented this year, how we're doing things. I'm talking to you from my home studio on the coast of Maine. And what I wanted to share with you today is a very brief look at some of my work in the sea as a photojournalist. You know, I often describe what I do as sort of parachuting into the lives of scientists and trying to create visual context for their research essentially telling stories with science. So if you'll bear with me, I'm just going to share the screen and launch my presentation here. So, I've been exploring Earth's oceans for about for 4 decades now, and working for National Geographic magazine for about 22 years. And I've become somewhat addicted to having these extraordinary experiences in the sea. To me, the ocean really is the perfect place to work if you're a photographer and a storyteller, because so much of it remains unexplored, and the potential to reveal secrets exists on nearly every dive. You just never know what you might find when you slip beneath those waves. There's no end to the fascinating stories that can be told. And not very long ago, I was being interviewed about my work by another magazine, a photo magazine, and one of the questions the interviewer asked me was, what did I think the most important photograph ever made was since the advent of photography? Well, there was, of course, a temptation to pick one of my own, but instead, what I said was this, the photos that first showed us Earth from space. And I'm sure I'm not the first person to say that, but it's certainly worth repeating, because I think when we saw these images from NASA back in the 1960s, we instantly realized a couple of things: that we very much live on this beautiful planet, this blue jewel floating out in the darkness of space, but we also could instantly see that we live very much on a water world. It's often been said that about 3/4 of the Earth's surface is ocean, and that's true, but I think maybe an even more important statistic is that 98% of the biosphere, 98% of where life can exist on planet Earth is ocean. So it really is in our best interest to explore this watery world and to protect it. Every other breath that we take comes from the sea. So my work then is about exploring this watery world photographically. It's been a personal journey of discovery over the years, and about trying to peel back the layers of mystery that exist with wildlife and ecosystems down there, spending as much time as I can to figure it all out. I've sort of come to the conclusion that maybe my most important role remains as that of an artistic interpreter of all that I see, and as a storyteller. I need to understand the science. That's, of course, very important, but what I'm trying to capture is the poetry that exists in the sea. I've also realized and learned over time that humans respond emotionally to powerful pictures, and that a photograph or a film can stay with people probably for their entire lives. It's a very powerful tool for getting people to care. So in the years that I've been doing this work, I often search for those special moments underwater that I can photograph that will translate photographically and maybe make people want to know more. It could be a simple scene, such as a little yellow goby living inside an abandoned soda can, or maybe a giant whale with my assistant standing on the bottom, sort of as if they're having a conversation here. This was a new population of southern right whales that we found in the subantarctic of New Zealand that had never seen humans before. So those are the moments I'm looking for. But, more and more frequently these days, many of the things that I'm seeing are serious problems in the ocean, things that may not be evident to most people. Unless you're diving beneath those waves on a regular basis, you might not know about the problems that are occurring down there. This is a photo that I made just last year of a sea turtle that was wrapped in the plastic rope handle of a plastic basket, like a laundry basket. I made this photo and then disentangled the turtle, but more and more frequently these days, these are the things that I'm seeing underwater, and I feel a sense of responsibility as a journalist and a sense of urgency to tell these stories as well, so we have a more complete picture of what's happening down in the ocean. Now, several years ago, I proposed a story to National Geographic about something called the global fisheries crisis, which was really just looking at the problems surrounding many of the issues surrounding commercial, industrialized overfishing. That just since World War II, last 60 or so years, we've lost 90% of the big fish in the ocean, the tuna, the billfish, and the sharks. And with this coverage, I wanted to do many things, one of which was I wanted to give readers a sense of some of the ways that fish are caught underwater because it's not like many of the other things that we eat. It's not like other forms of agriculture. For example, one of the most common methods of fishing in the world is something called a trawl net. We see a small one here that I photographed in Mexico that was being used to catch shrimp. But this same principle is used on a much grander scale all over the world. You have a net with two big steel doors on either end, and it's towed through the ocean. Very effective at catching whatever the intended species might be, in this case, shrimp that bounce into that net. But as you can also envision, it's indiscriminate, catches everything in its path. And in this case, it was a bottom trawler that was effectively clear-cutting that precious benthic layer as well. This is a photo that I made that shows the fisherman's hands holding the shrimp that he caught after towing that net for only 1 hour. He had maybe 7 or 8 shrimp, and all those other animals that are dead on the deck of his boat are known as bycatch. These are incidental kill that have no commercial value and will be thrown back into the sea as trash. So in many places in the world, this is the true cost of a shrimp dinner. You know, a handful of shrimp and maybe 12 pounds of other animals that have to die in the process. With the same story, I also spent time in the shark fishing industry because back then, over a decade ago, and still today, every single year on planet Earth, we are killing in excess of 100 million sharks. And before I went out to photograph that part of the story, I sort of wrestled with the notion of how do I make a picture of a dead shark that will resonate with readers. And I wanted to create empathy. And it was this one morning when I jumped in the Sea of Cortez and swam along this gill net, I saw a thresher shark that had just recently died. And as I framed it up in my camera's viewfinder, it struck me as a crucifixion. Hope that maybe that would give some empathy to that staggering statistic of 100 million. Now, I also spend time, of course, working on solutions, stories about solutions. You know, it's not just about the problems. We have to have solutions. And one such story was a story that I did a few years ago for the Geographic about aquaculture, looking at ways that we can give wild stocks a break in the ocean. And, you know, with this, I wanted to focus on some of the best methods. Of course, like anything with aquaculture, there can be good methods and not so good methods, but I wanted to focus on the ones that seemed to be better. And one of the companies that I photographed was this Mexican company that had been using trawlers to catch shrimp, like the net that I showed a little earlier there. But they had a government buyback program in Mexico, and this company was selling all of their trawlers using the money to invest in aquapods, a type of aquaculture, these pods that are made in the state of Maine. And this was one of their last trawlers that they were towing out to raise shrimp. It was a very effective way of doing it and less destructive. Another company that I photographed was in Canada, in the west coast of Vancouver Island, where a scientist started a company doing integrated multi-trophic aquaculture, where they're raising different species in symbiosis. They all work in harmony with one another. This was about 1 million scallops that we see in these underwater cages that actually filter the water, keep the ecosystem pure. Each one of these products is a harvestable product that they can sell, but they're all working in harmony with each other. And I also spent quite a bit of time over the years working on stories about marine reserves, looking at giving the ocean a break, you know, creating more protected places in the ocean. When I did that global fisheries story, I did a separate story in that same issue about marine reserves, and I went to New Zealand, which was very progressive in terms of protecting their exclusive economic zone. I photographed coastal marine reserves like we see here, these fragile places that were resilient and coming back with protection. You know, here we see a photo that I made in the North Island of New Zealand on a very stormy day when the dive boat captain didn't even want to go out, but I sort of pushed him to go because the day before I was talking with an old-time Kiwi diver who began diving in this place in the 1960s. And he told me over tea that he believed that the marine life was better here today than it was when he started diving decades ago. And, you know, I had never met anyone who told me that. Pretty much everywhere I go, people say you should have been here a decade ago or 2 decades ago. But here was a place that was better today than it was in the 1950s or 60s, simply because they protected it in the 1980s. So that leads me to my most recent cover story for National Geographic, a story called Saving Our Oceans. And I proposed this story with the premise of 2016. This was a cover story in 2017, And I used 2016, which was the centennial anniversary of the National Park Service in the United States, as an opportunity to look to the next 100 years in protecting our oceans. And I wanted to focus on places that were not yet protected in US waters as a way of showing Americans what belongs to them and how these fragile places like Cortez Banks, located 100 miles off the coast of San Diego, could easily vanish. You know, we could imagine a trawl net towing through here and it would disappear with a whimper. Few people would ever know. And even though few Americans or any people in the world would ever maybe get to go and venture out to a place 100 miles offshore and dive down 100 feet to see these places, that they really are these treasures that belong to everyone. They are oases that provide a haven for marine life and ecosystems that give us the oxygen we need. And, you know, that through science and photography, we can reach so many more people. And I believe that's the real message of what I wanted to communicate this morning. So a very brief look, but sort of a thumbnail sketch of a little bit about the work that I do, and sort of blending photography and science as a way of bringing these issues to masses of people. So with that, I will close out my presentation.
Thank you so much for having me be a part of this panel. I'm really excited to talk about a topic that's very dear to my heart. My name is Jonatha Giddens. I'm a National Geographic Fellow and Chief Scientist for the National Geographic Society's Exploration Technology Lab Deep Sea Research Project. Growing up, I didn't always see myself as a scientist. I became a marine ecologist to learn more about the ocean and learn about ways that I could help to protect it. But I have, for as long as I can remember, I've loved the ocean because of the feeling that I would get standing on the shore and looking out to this vast expanse of the sea and just feeling like I was a part of something on this planet Earth with the ocean there, feeling like I was part of something magnificent and really special. And so that feeling is what I really want to share through my work today. As a scientist and an artist. This drawing I did on my first trip overseas when I was a teenager. I went with my dad to the Isle of Skye, Elgol. And on that day, I had been running around snapping pictures, trying to capture everything in my camera. But that day at Elgol, my camera battery died. And so I put the camera away and I just sat there and I used all of my observation capacities to really observe the place very deeply from an artist's approach. And after that, I went home, or I was on the same trip, but I drew this picture for my dad as a gift of that place, Elgol. And I'll never forget that juxtaposition of running around trying to just kind of quickly snap pictures of things compared to sitting down and really contemplating the essence of a place and using that artist perspective. So there at Elgol, I remember feeling like I had reached the very edge of the earth, but I would later learn that actually below the surface in the deep sea is really the Earth's last frontier, unexplored frontier. And so to explore the deep ocean and to document the life there, in 2009, the National Geographic Society Exploration Technology Lab developed the Deep Sea Camera System. And since 2009, these have been all over the world mostly with pristine seas expeditions to help inspire and inform the designation of marine protected areas around the world. And so this innovative technology, these cameras that are lightweight and low cost that can take us down to peer into the deep sea like never before, really have the potential to transform how we explore and document the deep sea. So what we do with is we get these images, and then through analysis, through annotation, we turn the images into quantitative data for analysis to be able to inform protection and management of these deep sea ecosystems. But our exploration shouldn't stop at that number, because as human beings, we experience more than just numbers of things. We experience qualities such as beauty and wholeness in nature. So instead, we don't just use our intellectual mind to experience places. We use our imagination and intuition to experience places and our connection to them on longer timescales. So this was from an expedition to the Seychelles in 2019. We were exploring the deep sea and getting images for analysis. But I was also using my imagination to sense my connection with the place in deep time. And so that's why I feel like we need art and science together to be able to share these kind of transformative experiences that we have when we're out exploring. And art integration with science is not new, it's old. It's as old as natural history itself. So here's a picture of naturalist Beebe and engineer Barton with their bathysphere, which about 100 years ago, they took this ball of steel down hundreds of meters off of Bermuda to take a first look at what's living in the deep there. But the imaging technology wasn't advanced enough yet to be able to take pictures down there. So they called up through a telephone wire to artist Bosselman on the ship, and she drew those pictures that Beebe described peering out of the porthole. So while technology took the two men to the bottom of the seafloor, it was art that brought the seafloor to life in the hearts and minds of people. And as with field journaling, you can think about Darwin's journals as he went around the world and started to formulate his theory of evolution, or Humboldt's journals as he went around the world and started to formulate what is the foundation for our modern theory of biogeography. So you really need that kind of artist's approach to observation to be able to pull together the grand scale of things. So it was Goethe who said that if we wish to achieve a living understanding of nature, we must follow her example and make ourselves as mobile and flexible as nature herself. So in this spirit of Goethean philosophy, I developed a field journaling technique that I shared with scientists aboard an expedition to the Galapagos late last year with National Geographic Lindblad expeditions, to engage more of our senses in exploring nature. And so this field journaling technique involved observation exercises to get out of our preconceived notions of things, drawing exercises to be more connected to the appearing phenomena themselves, and writing exercises, especially in the form of haiku, the Japanese ancient form of poetry, to really distill those experiences into word images. And then those journal entries then become the raw material for our science communication, because it's the personal story that engages people in the science. And so for me, this journaling activity acts to connect the deep sea with surface waters and human culture with nature. And so finally, what I share when I do explore classroom visits with middle schoolers from time to time, I share this journaling activities with them and invite them to do their own activities just in their own backyards, in their own home, because you can do these observations everywhere. And I share with them a quote from my favorite poet, Mary Oliver, who said, "Instructions for living a life: pay attention, be astonished, tell about it." And I think this really sums up the one pursuit of art and science together, which is really to explore our world, to illuminate the beauty of it, to find meaning in that beauty, and then share it. And so with that, I'll wrap up, and thank you all very much.
Thank you, Jonatha. We'll hear from Ian now.
All right, hello everybody. My name is Ian Shive, and I'm happy and very honored to join such a great lineup of speakers to talk about the ocean. I've had an incredible opportunity over the last several years to work as a photographer and filmmaker, documenting places that very few people, if any, have ever really gotten to see, and that's our marine national monuments. For the last number of years, about 8 years or so, I've had the privilege of traveling to many of our national parks, documenting those, and many of our national wildlife refuges, which are just absolutely fantastic. There's one in every part of our country. But national wildlife refuges and marine national monuments are part of that same sort of protected umbrella that we have here in the United States, but obviously play a role on the global stage for oceanic conservation. And so I began this journey almost 8 years ago, working with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and a lot of other partners to try and connect people to places they may not get to experience through film and photography. And these days, you know, so many of the first experiences, especially for youth, come through handheld devices or screens like we're all sitting in front of right now, televisions, movie theaters, all of the digital formats are, in many ways, that first connection with some of the grandest experiences that nature has to offer. And so with that in mind, I've really focused on a trajectory that would allow me to use the power of storytelling in images and the three-dimensional, almost four-dimensional storytelling options that you have in film. And so beginning about 3 or 4 years ago or so, I began documenting our marine national monuments for a project which culminated in this film, Hidden Pacific. And I specifically want to talk about this because it's a different kind of experience in the conservation world, in the sense that this ended up not just being a film or something that people can stream at home, but an IMAX 3D movie with a fully immersive environment. And that to me was a magical way to bring places that people might not otherwise get to visit, either because they're very remote and isolated, or because of their closures to public visitation, due to their ecological value, and the importance of protecting those areas. And so this film was the conduit for that. But actually creating it and getting to these places and figuring out how do we go about doing it has been quite an adventure. Our marine national monuments are protected areas. You might be more familiar with places like Bears Ears National Monument, which has been in the news quite a bit for its threats to its protection. But similarly, we have areas in the ocean, and we have 5 of them in the United States. There's the Marianas Trench, which is all the way over there on the east side of east side of the United States, the east side of your screen as well. Papahanao Mokuakea Marine National Monument, which is part of the Northwest Hawaiian Islands, about the farthest island, almost the farthest island, the Midway Atoll. It's about 1,200 miles or so from the islands we're familiar with, like, you know, Maui and the Big Island and Oahu. In the middle of it all are Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument, and then Rose Atoll Marine National Monument, which is about 185 miles east of American Samoa. And these areas, and the 5th one, I'm sorry to not include that, is Northeast Canyons and Seamounts. It's the only one that's in the Atlantic currently, and it's up off the coast of New England. The places are exceptionally vast. The marine monuments total over 750 million acres of ocean, islands, and atolls. And it sounds like a vast area when you think of a place like Papahanao Mokuakea, where this island, Midway, here, this is Eastern and Spit Island at Midway, you think about 1,200 miles for just one monument, and it sounds like an enormous area. But from a scientific standpoint, it's the minimum amount of space that is really required to keep these places healthy, to keep them thriving, to keep the wildlife that's found here, like the short-tailed albatross, which nest on Midway. It's the minimum required to keep them running. And so the value of protecting places like this is exceptional. You know, this is an image that I think, unfortunately, many of us have become familiar with, the idea that seabirds have plastic in their stomach. And the threats that challenge these places are important. And an important part of the story that I believe we need to tell as well. Though a lot of what I've really focused on has been not just threats, but really hope and inspiration. And as a filmmaker, a lot of the work that I'm doing is going to reach youth. Things like an IMAX 3D movie goes to classrooms, and it goes to youngsters who might learn about the World War II history of a place like Palmyra Atoll, who might be mesmerized by the magic of a place that looks like something you might otherwise think of as paradise. And the water, which in a place like this, it was so amazing to see, these areas that are so isolated, how little impact they've had from us. And there's really no place on Earth that hasn't been impacted from us, including these remote atolls. But these are, in many cases, the best examples of what the Pacific could look like, what places like the tourist destinations in Hawaii could look like with the right protections and with the right amount of focus from us as a society. But I think about that magic, and I realize that hope and inspiration is such an important thing to convey. You really want to be able to capture that magic of a place and also pique the curiosity of those younger generations. And so I have always viewed my role less even almost as a documentary filmmaker or photographer, but almost as an educator, because this is the way that they will learn. This is the way that everyone will learn, because not just young people, but everyone who can't visit these places, this is what they'll learn about these giant coconut crabs that roam the jungle, the size of, their bodies are the size of like a football. Of islands like Rose Atoll, which, you could walk around in 15 minutes, yet are critical nesting habitat for seabirds and for sea turtles that rely on them for reproduction. And they're just magnificent places, and I'm just very, very thankful that I've had the opportunity to go there and recognize the value of not only what their protection as a marine national monument has afforded them, but also their remoteness, which has acted as a sort of barrier to many human impacts. Of course, garbage and things still wash ashore and are problematic for a lot of these creatures and a lot of these places, but they are absolutely magnificent. And photography and film, I think, really points the way for this. This is a little bit of a preview of some of the footage that we captured while we were out there. It's also part of our film, Hidden Pacific, and to imagine to sit there and just hear the sounds of nature surrounding you, with your friends on a class trip, and the ocean is just undulating above you, and you feel like you can reach out and touch a shark or the fin of a manta ray. To me, that's a very powerful tool, and comes, I think, a great responsibility as well when you have something like this. And so to be able to bridge the gap between science that's taking places like that and education and connecting them to the public where they are is a very important step, I believe, in our creative arts and our pursuit of the creative arts. The film has been successful in reaching those immersive audiences, but I'm also a firm believer that it doesn't just end there. It doesn't just end with the film or with the photography, but that we need to use the media and publicity and outreach efforts to educate. And so we really brought the images forward through different partners, through press, through actual events, reaching millions of people through events, helping raise money for science and conservation. I think that there's a lot of things that people may not realize in the science world that rely on the media to build awareness, which then supplies the funds for that science to continue. Additionally, we created an education guide. So beyond the film, we created 80 pages free on our website so that any school, anyone who sees the film or wants to learn about marine monuments or coral atolls or sharks can learn about that can have lessons that they can tear right out of the page and bring out there. And so for me, everything is really about how do you package it across many different platforms and use film and photography as a tool to educate and to inspire protection of these important places. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Angela?
Hi there. My name is Angela Haseltine Potzie, and I am the founder and artistic director, executive director of Ashore, we're a nonprofit based in Bandon, Oregon, and basically we are an educational nonprofit, but we use the arts. And as you can see, there are sculptures around me. And what we're doing is we basically use the garbage picked up off of the beaches, and we create with our whole community to reach a wide variety of people. And it's very interesting because I love listening to these other panelists, and it's so great to be here because they're showing the reason that we need to keep our oceans clean and diverse, and with images of the beauty of the ocean. And it's challenging showing people the ugliness and the terrifying reality of the marine debris. But what I've tried to do, and I feel like Wash to Shore does fairly successfully, is we connect people with their responsibility and their connection to the problem and having them take ownership. So, you know, we actually have people coming into our workshop and sorting this junk by color and size and type. And we also then have them participate in making the small parts of the giant sculptures. So I'm going to take you on a tour, and a little bit of a tour. I'm in the exhibit hall, of course, which is closed because of the COVID-19 thing. And so you get to take a walk in the gallery here with me. So this is Zorbel, our rockhopper penguin. And we make sculptures so that you see objects that you use in your everyday life, and kids and adults all can connect with, oh my gosh, I own one of those. There's a flip-flop and a rice paddle and a handle from a paintbrush and a squirt bottle and a toy and all these various things. And then over here we have Angus the cowfish. Now, we try to really connect with the scientific accuracy of the animal, considering it's made with garbage. We don't color the debris. We wait for it to come in, and plastic comes in every color you ever wanted, so we get bright yellow. Yep, we all love this plastic stuff, and it's ended up polluting our ocean. We also make our sculptures very interactive, so you're allowed to touch them, and that means it's very accessible, and we try to reach the general public and kids and all ages and abilities. So I'm going to walk you through the whalebone rib cage. And we make things look kind of beautiful from a distance, and then you get up close and you realize it's made with, baby powder bottles and drink bottles and fishing gear. And the idea of making a whalebone rib cage was that so people could walk through it and they remember, and they could be educated about what's happening with whales, that whales are ingesting the stuff. And you get that sense when you're inside of this sculpture, oh, this is really a horrible thing. I need to do something about it. So let's walk. The thing that I love about Wash to Shore is we partner with scientists, we partner with zoos and aquariums to bring a traveling exhibit to them. So we have 4 traveling exhibits that have toured to over 31 locations in 10 years. We've reached over 28 million people seeing our work in person. And we also do commissioned work where people want a permanent piece so they could keep teaching with it. And that allows for the constant connection with the education of art and science together. I'm going to take you over here. We've made about 13 sea jellies out of all the water bottles that have washed ashore. This is something everybody knows about. So showing one of these where you can actually get inside of it, and I was a teacher for 30 years, and I know that if you can get people to remember and talk about it, then you've made a difference. And so that's really what we go for. Most of our sculptures are very large. So we're inside of a gallery, but a lot of our work is simply outside. So I want to show you one of our biggest sculptures that is in our gallery. It's called Steve the Weedy Sea Dragon. And if you see him from a distance, he's about 18 feet long and 10 feet tall. And I did a sea dragon because I'm absolutely in love with sea dragons, and they look like Dr. Seuss invented them, but they're real. So let's get close. And our volunteers did all of the seaweed down there. They did all the stitching of all the seaweed together. But I'm very proud that I was able to show that Steve is actually a male holding the eggs in his egg sac on his tail, so that I can then teach about the wonder of these animals in a way that people will go, wow, I can now see that. So here, over here, we've actually created the eggs out of water bottles, and you can even see the little eyes and things like that. So I try to get all those details. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, you can sort of see it. I don't know, it's kind of hard to see. Anyway, and then of course we make things so that people can understand and start a discussion. And the whole idea is to start people having the conversation, and then they take ownership. I often tell people that this is truly a consumer-driven and corporate-driven issue we have, where all of the pieces of plastic in all these sculptures was once purchased by someone. So we really ask people to look at their purchasing habits and their power as consumers to see what they could do about that. All right, so let's go a little bit more, and then this is actually a musical instrument, and it's again so that people can play with it. It's not just for kids. And then over here, we have built a lot of styrofoam coral reefs, and we also have an oil spill sculpture that you can lay down underneath and feel the sense of what it would be like if you were trapped under the oil and you were an animal. And then we can also make that connection about petroleum and plastics, and then in how that all, how that's what plastic's made from most of the time. Our bleached coral reef is all styrofoam rolled in from the beaches. Everything here is picked up off the beaches. One last piece I want to show you that's really powerful, and we have 3 of these. It's called Fish Bite Fish. And I'm going to ask our cameraman to get close up here. These are all bite marks by fish and other animals. You can actually see the marks in the fish. And this, people often ask me, how do you know the fish are eating it? And I'm like, well, what do you think? There's the evidence right here. So all of the artwork also, when we show it, we also have signage that goes with everything, where we give people action points they can take, talk about the animals, what you can find, and a little bit about the Washed Ashore as an organization. I'm going to ask us to come back over here and come back to the... And there's Zorabelle again. So basically, I just believe that the arts have this amazing ability to reach into the hearts and minds of people. And we've seen in the 10 years that we've done this, we've processed about 28 tons of garbage into over 80 works of art. And we've worked with about 14,000 volunteers. And it's by having everyone working together to help create the small parts of the sculptures. They wire stitch them in workshops that are open to the public all the time. And we have families come in. It's educational all along the way. And that's, it's just been a really satisfying thing. And I feel really grateful to be in the audience with all these other wonderful panelists who are also using the arts in a powerful way. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for including me in this, Barbara, and to everyone for your presentations. It's really exciting for me to see what everyone's doing and be a part of this amazing group. I am Courtney Madison. I'm a ceramic sculptor and an ocean conservation advocate based in Los Angeles. I'm here in my studio right now, but I'm actually sitting in front of the piece on this first slide. It's called Our Changing Seas 3. and it's representative of quite a bit of my work. I do really large scale, hand sculpted ceramic wall reliefs and other installations inspired by the fragile beauty of coral reefs and also the human caused threats that they face, like climate change and ocean acidification and pollution, things like that. This is the largest work I've created yet. It's in the US Embassy in Jakarta, Indonesia. And it was commissioned by the Office of Art and Embassies, which is a department at the State Department that curated a collection of work for the new embassy that they built in Jakarta. It's about 28 feet tall and 18 feet wide. It's really gigantic, and it's all handmade and glazed ceramic. I make all of my work right here in my studio in LA. I build everything on the floor, and it's sort of like a three-dimensional puzzle. So I'll design a work with a sketch and then create footprints on a grid on the floor of my studio. And then I know the size of every piece as it relates to one another before I ever start building anything. This is a work I completed last year called Our Changing Seas 4. A lot of my work really tries to elevate coral reefs off the seafloor and kind of throw them into space. And to me, that kind of emphasizes how coral reefs are really at a turning point in terms of their future and how their fate is kind of in our hands, and it's up to us to protect coral reefs. We've lost half of them in the last 30 years. Within my lifetime, we've lost half of coral reefs, and we could completely lose them within my lifetime. And so I feel a mission to inspire people to care about protecting them. And the main thing that inspired me to protect them in the first place was how beautiful they are and how kind of exotic and strange the different organisms on a coral reef are and how they look and interact with each other. And I think there's beauty in that diversity. And I find coral reef organisms to be really, really sculptural. So I hope that that sense kind of draws people in and makes them connect personally. And I think coral bleaching and ocean acidification are especially interesting. Coral bleaching is one of the best visual representations I can think of for climate change, because corals literally turn white, they bleach, and they look like these ghoulish, ghostly skeletons of themselves. And so this is a work I completed last year called Malum Geminos that plays on that idea. And it was inspired by Dr. Jane Lubchenco, who was the administrator of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And in 2009, she made a speech at the Climate Summit in Copenhagen saying that ocean acidification is like the equally evil twin of climate change in terms of what's damaging coral reefs. So Malum Geminos is evil twins in Latin. And this sort of book-matched pattern represents those ideas, and it sort of plays with this like skeletal, creepy motif of corals kind of eroding and dissolving into gelatinous blobs. She also says that ocean acidification is like osteoporosis of the sea, which I find really interesting. I have a background in marine conservation, science, and policy. So most of my education is actually in coral reef conservation, more than traditional art. And I use that background to inspire all of my work. I got a master's in environmental studies, focusing on coral reef conservation and the kind of exploring the potential for art to inspire ocean conservation. So this work right here is Our Changing Seas #1. This was the culmination of my master's thesis at Brown that I completed in 2011. And this work debuted in the lobby of the Commerce Department in Washington, D.C. And actually today it's still on display, but nearby in downtown D.C. at the headquarters for AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, which publishes Science Magazine. And in addition to creating my own sculptural work, I've done a lot of outreach and getting other people involved in creating artwork to inspire them to feel more connected and more excited about these conservation issues. And it's a fun way to start these conversations. This is a work called Semesta Terumbu Karang, which means coral universe in Bahasa Indonesia. I've done a lot of work in the last few years in Indonesia, and this is a work that I was really fortunate to be invited to design by the Coral Triangle Center, which is a wonderful nonprofit organization based in Bali. And I worked with them to design this work, and then we got over 300 volunteers and Indonesian artists to help us create this work. And it's about 61 feet long and comprised of about 2,000 individual corals. And the US Embassy in Jakarta was interested in kind of collaborating on doing press for this piece. So the ambassador from the US Embassy came out during the Our Ocean Conference in 2018, and we did a press conference to raise awareness using this artwork as a backdrop. And since then, last fall, I was in Indonesia again with the US Embassy and the US Consulate in Surabaya, Indonesia, doing outreach projects at schools where I would create small ceramic corals with students. So we were in Jakarta and a small island near Jakarta called Tidung. And this is a photo visiting a high school in Alor, Indonesia. And it's another fun way to get people involved and get them really excited about talking about these issues. I think when you're using your hands and you're sculpting, you pay more attention to what you're actually building. So you pay more attention to the anatomy of corals from pictures, but you also kind of get seduced into talking about why they're so beautiful, why they're so threatened, and what we can do to protect them. And I think art in general has a really immense power and potential to inspire that kind of sense of caring and hope for conservation. And so it's really exciting for me to do work like that, where I can actually reach out and communicate with people all around the world about why we need to act so urgently to protect life in the ocean. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Courtney. Now we'll turn to the questions for the panel. And it seems that this is a question that resonated with many people, and that is, what is it about the arts that enable us to better understand the oceans and the threats to its health and biodiversity?
Well, I'd be happy to start. I believe that the visual is, well, it could be also sounds, and it could be musical, it could be, words as well. But I think that when people are involved in the arts, it wakes up a different sensibility than a traditional way of communicating. So it's the language that's very universal, and it can reach into the hearts and minds of people like nothing else can. And if it's partnered with science and brings in factual information as well, like I think so many of the people in this panel have noticed, that you can touch people in new ways and get a new audience for the information you're trying to reach people about.
Yeah, I would just add to that and fully agree that, I think art speaks to us on an emotional level.
Yeah.
It also sometimes allows us to get our heads around complex issues. If you just hear about something or you just read something on a printed page, it might be a little bit difficult to comprehend what that really means. But art instantly, in many cases, communicates those issues in an emotional way. And when we connect emotion, I believe, to issues, we take ownership, or we remember them maybe much longer, maybe for the rest of our lives. So I think art, can touch people in many different ways. Everybody is grabbed by something a little bit different, and having a broad spectrum of artists representing issues and passionate concepts in the ocean is a way to help us fall in love with the sea, but also to understand the threats and the solutions. So it's certainly very important on many levels.
Yeah, and I would just add to that to emphasize kind of what Brian was talking about is that with traditional, conventional Western science, we're really looking at things with our intellect, and we're kind of taking things apart and looking at facts in kind of a narrow way. And as human beings, we experience more than just individual facts. And I think that kind of narrow way of looking at things is what kind of sets up this dichotomy between humans and nature. Whereas art, when you look at things holistically and how they're interconnected, using more than your intellect, you're using your intuition and your imagination, and you can sense more of the wholeness and your connection to nature through the art. So I think that's why arts can really grab people and bring them in, because they intuitively recognize their connection and how important it is to save the ocean, not for the ocean's sake, but because we rely on the ocean and it is us, we're not separate. So I think the two are really needed hand in hand for that kind of behavioral change.
Yeah, I really agree with that. I think it's really easy for us to feel disconnected from the ocean. Even if you live right on the coast, it's easy for it to just be out of sight, out of mind. And we're all connected by water. Like life on Earth wouldn't exist without water, as Sylvia Earle always says. And I think that art can be an amazing reminder of what is beneath the surface and what is so spectacular and fragile and powerful and amazing that we need to protect and that we take for granted most days.
I just want to, just one quick thought is really that the arts offer a universal language that is a really unifying language too, that can be understood by anybody, anywhere. If it's done right and is done well, it reaches a vast majority of people. And a lot of times scientific information just reaches a certain group, or environmental information gets to a certain group, or art information at certain times. So it offers an amazing opportunity to reach vast numbers in a way that everyone can understand.
Given that your approaches are very different, you use different media, I thought maybe it would be helpful to the audience if you described what the collaborative process of working with oceanographers looks like.
I could start with that. You know, in general, I would say, at least for me in photography and film, especially filmmaking, it's an extremely collaborative process, not just with the oceanographers, scientists, biologists that you're working with, but even just on the filmmaking side. And so I think a lot of the time we maybe see a still photo, or we see, you know, a 40-minute film or a show, but there's so much that goes into that. And it really is, you know, it's like an ensemble, right? Every little piece of that really adds so much to the experience that people have. And it requires those levels of contributions, whether it's cinematographers or audio folks, but as well as the scientists, because without their guidance, I mean, you know, certainly I'm sure any of us who spent a lot of time in the field have picked up a lot of things, but the scientists really are the first step in interpreting the environment that we're filming. They help us understand what we're seeing and why we're seeing it. And so they help bridge that connection to us on the creative side in a way that allows us to say, well, maybe that's what we should be capturing, or this is a story we should be telling. So they really are the lead in that regard. And all of our projects have always been about having scientists first tell us, this is where we should go. Wake up in the morning, you're on a boat. Well, where should we go today? Well, I think this is a great place because the weather's doing this, and we saw this species yesterday heading out, and the tide is moving this way. And it really is the thing that helps drive so much of our ability to capture and tell these stories. So for me, it's always been a hugely collaborative process, not to mention you're probably all living together on a boat, right? So you've got to all really figure out, how do we work together to tell these stories in a way that's not only enjoyable for us, but enjoyable for everybody watching them.
I'll say something on that. Partnering with scientists has just been really exciting as an artist. I grew up with naturalists, and I've always looked closely at nature and identified things by Latin names, you know, like mushrooms usually, and a few other plants and animals. But with Washed Ashore, with our nonprofit, it has been very exciting because we've worked with the Smithsonian. At the Smithsonian Natural History Museum, we've had a piece there for 4 years, and I connected very much with the education people there and talked to them, you know, about how to make it as usable as possible. When we worked at the National Zoo, we installed a huge bleached coral reef right next to their coral propagation labs. And we worked with them on, and they were like, wow, this actually shows what we're trying to say. And as Courtney has mentioned, you know, it's such a powerful thing to see the bleaching of the reefs. So we've learned a lot as artists, and also just, I think as scientists have learned a lot about how arts can be very powerful to communicate some of the language, some of the things that they have a hard time reaching people with. And it's informed our work a lot because we try to be as scientifically accurate as we can, as to be respectful of the animals and the environments. Although we're working only with garbage, but you know, we do our best.
Yeah, I can second that. I think it's really fun for me to work with scientists because of my background in marine biology. I feel like I can sort of still speak the language, even though I work full-time as an artist now. And I think scientists often have some really interesting ideas about what would be impactful for people to inspire them. I interviewed a number of scientists and researchers when I was doing my master's thesis, and got some really interesting insights about what they thought would be especially interesting for people to know that they might not know otherwise about these important ecosystems. And I've done some work to display in scientific buildings before, and it's always funny to hear kind of the dorky science nerd comments that pop up about different taxonomy they recognize or whatever. That's always kind of fun to notice.
I guess I can jump in here real quick and just sort of build on a lot of these great comments. You know, as a photographer, as a photojournalist, before I propose a story, all the stories that I do for National Geographic are my ideas for the most part. And I might spend a year or more, sometimes several years, sort of gathering research to sort of understand what the story is, what it's about, and can it be expressed visually? Can I do the things that I might have in mind? So I'm collaborating with researchers throughout that whole process. And, you know, many times what I will do is, as I get a little bit closer, I'll talk to individual researchers and I'll say, you know, if I'm doing a story on the Mesoamerican reef and it's about connectivity between different ecosystems or something, I might say to the researchers, what are the 5 or 10 most important pictures that you think would be important in a story like this? If you're going to open the pages of National Geographic, you know, what should I not miss? You know, I need to make sure I have this or this. And then it's up to me to sort of spend the time out there and as I mentioned in my presentation, try to capture those things in a lyrical way or a poetic way. So I'm trying to represent the science in a way that might be engaging visually to the readers of the magazine, but it's completely a collaborative process. I have to make sure that I get it right, and knowing about behaviors of animals and, you know, interdependency with various ecosystems and so forth is critical to me getting that story correct. So anyway, just a little tidbit there.
Yeah, and I can just kind of sum up and wrap up by talking about the perspective of being the artist and the scientist, and how do you integrate that within one person, within one kind of mode of exploration. Because I think there, as an ensemble, there it makes a powerful team, but also when we, on an individual level, begin to think it through that whole process of both the intellectual, the rational mind, and also be able to think creatively within our own explorations is really wonderful way to kind of expand our work. And the one thing the art without the science is abstract, and the science without the art, well, at least can be abstract. But when you bring them together, that's what that partnership is really what connects you to a human experience, to lived experience. And that partnership, I think, is really important to grab people and to portray the importance of the work. I will say one thing about that, integrating art and science on this expedition to the Galapagos, having other scientists join me in this field journaling approach and how that worked with the science that we did. And I think it flowed really nicely, and it didn't take away from the science at all. It was a wonderful complement. It was something that people could do individually on their own time. But yet it helped to kind of bridge communication and team building, because we were all kind of shared this language together. And so I think, in practice of the scientist and the artist as the same person really kind of enhanced that expedition in terms of team building, communication, and just brought a nice element to our expedition.
Great. Last question. I'm sure the audience and people out on the internet are all very interested in the presentations and have been inspired, and maybe they want to do something similar on their own. What advice do you have for others who may be interested in drawing upon the arts to support ocean advocacy?
Well, I'll chime in there, because whenever we bring our exhibit to a zoo or an aquarium or a science center or museum, I do presentations, and I often get asked this question, how could we do this? And the first thing I say is work with an artist. Work with someone who understands the language of the arts and have respect for the arts as a language. I think that the arts, it's like photography. We can all take pictures with our phones. Photography, everyone can do it. But it's nice to also have an understanding of design and composition or craftsmanship, and the elements and principles of art, or a language that needs to be respected and learned and explored and practiced. And so I always tell people, find someone who knows that to work with, so that you can partner with someone like that who can bring the kind of experience that you're hoping for. And then, just dive in. Dive in and get started and see what happens,
I'd like to add to that as well. I think the opportunity to share media now is greater than ever before. And so we don't need to go around the world to some exotic destination to tell a story to make a difference, and certainly not to get started. I think the things that you're familiar with, the things that are right in your backyard, the part of nature that you are most passionate about, which is probably, and for me, it certainly was as a younger person getting started, was right there in my backyard. And so with so many new platforms on our phones and everywhere on the internet, there's a way to begin sharing, find out what connects with people. But the easiest way, I think, to do anything is to simply get started and start with something that you're most familiar and most passionate about.
And to add to that, totally agree, 100%. I would add that, yes, join us, we need you, join the effort. And also to think about, in forming these teams, these ensembles of artists and scientists, think about, and scientists, this is advice for scientists as well, anybody, starting on a mission, is to involve artists in the beginning and think about it as a whole process that you do together. It's not something to just be tacked on at the end, like, oh, now we need our outreach component, So I think really working together through that whole process, starting from the beginning, and then it'll be really enriched that way. But yes, join us, we need you.
Just 3 quick points. I would say that, if you're just starting out, really learn your craft, hone your skills, whatever that might be, whether it's schooling or just getting out and doing it. Obviously, study nature and science to the best that you can, so you understand that your art is representing these things sort of accurately, if that's your intent, and then just follow your passion. I mean, you know, that's what's going to drive you. None of this is easy. It's long hours and requires a lifetime sort of pursuit. But if you love what you do, then it's not going to be a problem. It's not going to be work. So certainly passion is a big part of the equation. So that's it.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with Brian. And I think that eccentricity is a virtue. That's the biggest advice I can give. I think the combination of art and science can sound really bizarre, but we're all an example of how you can make it work. And just if you have some really oddball combination of interests, go for it. And you never know where it'll take you. I think the ocean, I think environmental conservation needs creative thought more than ever right now. We need to find creative solutions, and artists can be a big part of that.
You're here. I agree. So true.
So what I've heard from all of the very distinguished and creative panelists was some common threads about the beauty that art offers, the emotional connection, the importance of intuition and imagination, and engaging all of the senses, aligned with storytelling, all help in connecting science and art and making the two disciplines available in a way that independently each of those disciplines might not be able to be as effective in spotlighting problems to the oceans. So we hear a lot about the problems, but also we're hearing about the solutions. And the most important point that I come away with is that there's hope and inspiration. And I think that message is the most significant that artists can offer at this point in time. So I'd like to thank all the artists for their participation and the National Marine Sanctuary Foundation, again, for organizing this panel. It's a great service to the field, and I'm sure people have enjoyed it and will benefit in their own work from what everybody here had to say today. So thank you.